I'm ready.
Okay. So last time we covered fall of 2021 with Brian's TBI and pregnancy that ended in miscarriage, and that was a hard time for us, just a perfect storm of events that made it particularly difficult to manage. So a couple weeks after the miscarriage, Brian decided he needed to leave his job as an arborist. Since the TBI, he had been struggling with the noise. Running chippers and chainsaws all day. And then headaches, dizziness, brain pops, and ongoing stress in the work environment. So he left that job, and the change in his work made a huge and immediate difference in his demeanor. He was much calmer, didn't get upset as easily, was less stressed, and he just seemed much more at peace. And that also gave him an opportunity to rest and let his brain recover from the injury. And his emotional state stabilized significantly in that time as well. I haven't always managed those changes very well. And I tried really hard with this one to do better so he felt supported, because it was worth his mental health and the reduction in stress for him, but then also the trickle down for the household. So following the TBI and miscarriage, Brian encouraged me, and I agreed that I should look into getting some help. So I went to therapy, and I went mostly because I wanted tools to help me communicate better and support Brian as a caregiver of him with PTSD. The first 6 months weren't that productive, but I did get one tool that I feel was useful, and that was to not take things personally when Brian would get upset. That most likely it didn't actually have anything to do with me. Maybe a little bit, but not the bulk of it. And what she told me to do is, she said just to say, I'm sorry, and you're right. And not get defensive or argumentative. The idea was to calm him down and not get him more upset. And it sounds kind of simple and silly, and why didn't I think of that before? But for me, I felt like if I was saying I'm sorry or you're right, that I had something that I was actually apologizing for, or I did something wrong, and that I actually agreed. And what actually ended up happening was, it was less about what I was saying and more showing understanding. He didn't actually think that I was agreeing or apologizing for something, but he felt understood, and like he didn't have to prove and argue a case. And it did help. Otherwise, the first therapist wasn't too helpful to me. But she ended up moving, and they transitioned me to a new therapist. And I was still looking for those strategies to help with communication and supporting Brian. And she made it pretty clear that that was better handled in a couples therapy setting. And so I kind of was like, well, now what? What am I here for? And she really pushed me to dig into my part of things. And I think what that ended up being for me was the years of dealing with Brian's PTSD kind of encouraged some tendencies and coping skills that I already had growing up as a military kid. I keep emotions at arm's length, and when they get to be too much, stuff them in a box and pack them away. And the other is to pacify and mollify others. Find ways to kind of keep the peace. So we'll kind of go into those a little bit more. Emotions. I felt that I had to keep my emotions controlled to keep the stability and calm in our household. When my emotions did leak out, which more often than not was more like an explosion, things didn't go well, as you might expect. First, because instead of dealing with just one or two emotions, we were dealing with the whole box all at once. And second, because my timing was terrible. It usually came out in stressful situations, disagreements, when Brian was already dysregulated and not in a place to be supportive or helpful when my emotions came out, which then reinforced for me that, oh, it's your emotions that are causing this, and so he's not okay with that. We got to keep the emotions under control. My emotions were bad. Of course, letting them all out in one big dump isn't going to be a good idea, and then doing it at a bad time also is not going to do good things. But for me, I was linking it all to his reaction and not those other parts. And then peaceful times, I didn't want to rock the boat. So when we did have times where he was regulated and we could deal with my emotions a little bit better, I didn't want to bring those up, if I could even remember them. For me, a lot of times I packed it down and moved on. Once we got over that hump, I didn't really dwell on it, and I couldn't recall all those emotions again until I got triggered again, which was usually again in a bad time. What that ended up meaning for me now is that I struggle to acknowledge or even identify, name my emotions. I have to get over my pride of being okay with having feelings, good and bad. And that it's not a sign of weakness, that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to have, insert not good feeling, angry, frustration, sadness. It's okay to be okay with vulnerability. Asking for help, which I'm still terrible at. My therapist would often remind me, you are human. And I would get upset every time she said it because I felt weak. So the other one coping mechanism thing that I've used a lot of my life was, to pacify and mollify others. And I've called myself different names to describe this part of myself, more as a peacemaker or mediator. I hadn't really considered the term people pleaser, probably because it doesn't sound as noble or nice. But the reality is that is a part of who I am. I want people to feel acknowledged and okay, and therefore I've not done a good job of having boundaries, because I will take more things on just to make someone else feel okay. And this served me well in all my moves and school transitions and stuff. I could, I wasn't threatening. I kind of made things nice to be around, I guess, and hopefully could get a friend or two in those moves. But I tried to do this in some way in my family to meet the needs of Brian and all the kids. And my needs went further and further down on the priority list. And I recognized that I needed things for myself, and I felt the pull to do something, but I didn't feel supported to act on that. And then after a while, it hurt too much to dwell on that, and so I just stopped acknowledging that need altogether. And so every time bringing up, something that, I need or whatever, I would start crying in therapy. I get teary just about every time. And it would surprise me. Why am I crying? And I still don't quite grasp it. I ask myself, is it because I'm acknowledging a need? That I'm actually human and need things? And is this somehow a weakness? That you need help? I haven't done a good job of asking for help. And Brian's been doing a really good job of encouraging me and trying to support me to take time for myself more recently. And that's really helped me to make some progress here. One of the main things you might read about as a caregiver is you need to take care of yourself. And I haven't done that very well. It's still a work in progress. While I was diving into therapy, Brian decided to transition to a new job as an author. He took all of his poetry that he'd been writing over the years to process life and struggles and turn them into a book. And he successfully published his book, Sarcastic Hope, 50 Poems of Faith and Pain. You can get it on Amazon. I'll put a link in the notes if you want to check it out. From there, he's continued to write short stories and other fiction for publication, and he's currently working on a book on PTSD. After a few months and encouragement from my therapist, we started couples therapy. I was hopeful, but also unsure since we had tried this previously and hadn't had a lot of success. We finally found someone. We've been seeing her for about a year, and we're finally able to get some tools that we can both work with that have helped with our communication, especially during disagreements. And the tools have helped a lot, especially when we remember to use them. I'm not sure that the tools would have been as helpful in years past without the work Brian had done in therapy, with meds, job changes, and just the hard work that he's put in to understand what he's dealing with and how to work through it. His hard work and continued will to keep trying and not give up has really made the difference, in my opinion. I don't know that I would have been able to share my feelings and feel heard and understood previously, and I don't know that we would have made as much progress on our communication struggles without his hard work. And I think that's important because what I've seen anecdotally in the groups and podcasts that I've listened to and stuff is that if a partner or spouse with PTSD or trauma is not willing to get help, to try, or to even recognize that there's an issue, then it seems that the relationship is more likely to fail. So I'm grateful to all your hard work.
You're welcome. Glad to do it. Not always at the time, but I'm glad I did it. How about that?
Yeah. It's been worth it. PTSD is not Brian. He's a good man trying to love and support us while struggling with an invisible disorder to the outside world. The manifestations of PTSD showed up in behaviors that to me and everyone else just looked like someone who is angry and thus dismissed, instead of seen as a sign of an internal struggle and a cry for help. I struggled to see past the PTSD symptoms. It's hard to not take things personally, especially when it seems directed at me. But Brian never stopped trying to explain what he was feeling or what he was dealing with internally. And in the midst of the struggle before the diagnosis, we didn't know if there'd be an end to our difficulties. Some days were really hard. And we just were putting one foot in front of the other and would go to bed at night hoping the next day would just be better. Loving someone with PTSD is not easy. Just as loving someone or caring for someone with physical illness or a limitation. Things are better now than in years past. It's still hard at times, but nothing like it used to be. And I don't know if PTSD ever actually goes completely away, but it seems to have diminished with all the work, the therapy, the medication, time, understanding on my part, and learning how to help him. That's made a big difference. I'm still pretty terrible at it, but we keep trying and working on it and committing ourselves to love even through the hard stuff. So that brings us to current day. Now, this series is about caregivers, but I haven't actually said a whole lot about what that actually is or what that's meant to me, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around that term. I know what a caregiver is, but I didn't apply that to myself until recently. And so going back over our history and telling this story is partially processing, but it's also trying to look at it all with a new lens of caregiver. I see where I didn't do things very well and other places where I did okay. But I think it does change your perspective if you can accept the title of caregiver and what that means for you and for your spouse or partner that you're caring for. Perhaps we can talk about this in another episode when I actually can process and find the right words to say what that all has meant for me.
Well, thanks for telling your story, babe.
You're welcome.
I know that it's helped other people just to hear that they're not alone. So thank you.
You're welcome.
You just bench pressed about 400 pounds of emotions there. Good job.